Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video as we continue to talk about potential NBA trades we could see this offseason, and specifically draft night trades as well, where typically a lot of the offseason trades do go down on one night. Of course, teams trying to move up, move down in the NBA draft, teams trying to position themselves to add in veterans. A lot of teams have cap space this year as well. Indiana is one of those teams, which I think makes the Indiana Pacers a very intriguing draft night trade team that we have to keep our eyes on for a few different reasons. Also, big shout out to Dalton on Twitter, who continues to tweet cool trade ideas at me. And I really do appreciate reading all of your guys' comments and tweets. I do read pretty much every single thing you guys send me. Every single comment that's been sent on the channel over the last 3 years, I have read. So a lot of time goes into the channel, and I hope you guys do enjoy that work. If you do, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. And let's jump into it here now with the Indiana Pacers in a video preview. The Pacers this draft own picks 7, 26, 29, 32, and 55. Nearly an unprecedented amount of draft picks this year, with 5 total selections, 3 of them in the first round, 1 very high second round pick, and then also a back end of the draft selection as well. In this video, there's going to be potential move-up trades where we look at how the Pacers could potentially trade up in the draft. I have 3 of those. We also have potential trade-back trades where Pacers maybe move out of their number 7 overall selection, and what that could potentially look like for them picking up either future assets or other pieces in that type of deal. And then we'll also look at potential trades for veterans. I think a lot of people are really going to be excited for that portion of the video. I think all of the trades I have in here, I believe there's 7 total trades. They're all very well thought out. I spent a lot of time kind of prepping this video and really considering some of the options. I think my favorite trade in the entire video is the very last one, the very final trade for a veteran. That's probably my favorite trade in here. I think it's the one that makes the most sense. But I think all of them are fairly well laid out. Just a reminder too, we do have a Discord. The link is in the description for that. If you want to go be a part of some really great basketball conversation and discussion, just join up on that Discord. It'll get you right in there. And then there's an Indiana Pacers team chat that you could participate in. Otherwise, just the general chat's always popping off with some interesting discussion. So when it comes to trading up, let's look at who the Pacers could potentially trade with to move up in the draft. And I think the first one that comes to mind, and it's a pretty clear spot for everybody, the Portland Trail Blazers, of course, are a team that makes a lot of sense. So what could a potential trade look like in a deal with the Portland Trail Blazers? Well, the Blazers, the whole point of them moving down would be to potentially improve their center position and give them something that, quite frankly, they just have not had for most of Damian Lillard's tenure in Portland, and that is rim protection. The Indiana Pacers this past season just renegotiated the contract with Miles Turner, which makes it a very tradable contract. He got a really nice raise this past season, but his contract number is pretty fair, around $20 million. And because of that, the Indiana Pacers and Portland Trail Blazers actually can money swap Miles Turner and Jusuf Nurkic. Now, that is kind of a negative contract for Indiana to take in here, and they're giving up a good center in Miles Turner who isn't that old. You might be thinking, well, why would Indiana do this? It's because it's a clear pathway for them to move up here from pick number 7 to pick number 3, which gives them the opportunity to likely select Brandon Miller on draft night out of Alabama. And in addition to moving up 4 spots in the top 10, you also move up pick 29 from the Boston Celtics, which they got from the Malcolm Brogdon trade. They move up to number 23, where the Blazers have the pick from the Josh Hart trade. So the Blazers here still maintain 2 first-round picks and add a really nice center into the fold. And Pacers fans, I understand what you're probably thinking here of, wow, this is kind of a lot of value to give up. I 100% understand that. What I think here is at 3 and 23, you can probably go something along the lines of Brandon Miller, and then maybe follow it up at 23 with Trace Jackson Davis, a player who I'm sure Pacers fans absolutely love out of Indiana. I think he would be a fantastic addition, kind of as a rim-rolling big for Tyrese Halliburton. I think that playstyle would be very successful with Halliburton. And I know Trace Jackson Davis is a player that would really fit Rick Carlisle's offensive system, with the way that, you know, Rick Carlisle found a lot of success out of Dwight Powell, who's also a free agent this offseason that I think the Indiana Pacers will actually look into quite a bit, because I do think that Dwight Powell would love to have a role somewhere, and I think that Rick Carlisle is one of the few coaches in the league that would give that to him. But here, the Pacers, the real point of doing this is moving up to number 3. I know it looks like, hey, we're giving up quite a bit of value here too, giving up Miles Turner, who's a good center on a good contract, and then also giving up the 7th overall pick and 29. To me, moving up 4 spots in this year's draft is a really premium ability. It's a really difficult thing to try and get done, so you have to give up something good here. I think, giving up Miles Turner, it hurts. But if it means getting Brandon Miller next to Tyrese Halliburton for the next 8 to 10 years, you have to feel pretty good about the end result, because I think Brandon Miller's skill set perfectly coincides with what Tyrese Halliburton does. Halliburton is one of the best drive and kick guys in the league. Brandon Miller is likely going to pay off a lot of those perimeter opportunities as a fantastic three-point shooter, and also somebody who can break guys down off the dribble a bit. I think that there's still going to be some elements that Brandon Miller has to grow in. But not only do you move up 1 pick, you move up 2 picks just by trading Miles Turner, who, remember, before the year, I think we would have talked about him maybe being traded for one of those future Lakers first. I think this is a pretty good outcome all in all here for the Indiana Pacers, just given kind of the perception around Miles Turner and where they could potentially end up with these selections. They've been trying to trade Miles Turner for a couple of years, to be completely honest. He's constantly been on the trade block, and they've explored moving him. They just haven't found a package that they like. Here, this one does make a lot of sense because the Indiana Pacers are moving up to 3, and the Blazers are getting a center that really fits their team, and also still maintaining draft selections to make their own picks, because I trust Mike Schmitz to get the job done at pick 7, where last year he took Shaedon Sharpe, and at pick 29, last year in the second round he took Jabari Walker. So he's able to find a lot of good talent later in the draft. I think that Portland would still be able to select well at those spots, and I think they would better well round out their team. And here, Indiana, they find themselves in a spot to add some top-end talent in this year's draft. Move up trade number 2, and this one's also a fun one. This one is actually with the Houston Rockets, and the Rockets find themselves in an interesting spot as well. This one's more about adding assets to later make a trade for something else, and this one looks a little bit different. Here, the Rockets would be getting Isaiah Jackson. They would be getting pick number 7, they would be getting pick number 26 and pick 29, and the Indiana Pacers would get pick number 4. Now, out of all of the trades in this video, this is probably my least favorite one, because the Pacers only get pick number 4 and 2 second-rounders back. For me, it was kind of hard to really differentiate the value here between what does Miles Turner add to a trade versus 26 and 29. And in terms of value, I think this is relatively accurate, but for the Pacers moving up to number 4, would it be for an Amen Thompson? And my answer to that is probably not. So this puts them in position to select their favorite of either Jarris Walker or Taylor Hendricks, in case they are worried that, maybe at pick 5, Detroit goes with one of those 2, and then 6, Orlando could potentially follow it up as well with one of those 2 players. It puts Indiana in a weird spot if those were their top 2 guys. So moving up, yes, you do sacrifice a former first-round pick in Isaiah Jackson here. You sacrifice 2 back end of the first-round picks to do it, but you're getting your guy essentially if you were to make this deal. Now, again, like I said, I don't absolutely love this for Indiana. I think this trade is skewed toward the Rockets' favor a little bit. And the thing is, people always in mock trades are like, oh, well, that team clearly wins. I think a lot of trades, typically, there's a pretty clear winner on day 1 of the trade. There's not very often, a lot of times, that teams are like, oh, well, people aren't like, well, that team did well and that team did well. I think typically there's kind of a little bit of sway in the opinion on who won what. To me right now, I think the opinion would be that the Rockets are winning this deal, and I do like this trade for the Rockets. I would execute this trade if I was Houston, because even though I love Amen Thompson, I think that there's talent in this year's draft at pick number 4. I think the Rockets getting other assets that they could potentially trade for veterans, and getting a young big in Isaiah Jackson, who I think has a future in this league still, would be fantastic for them. And I think the Pacers, really the only reason to do this is if you're dead set on a guy. If you really feel like you want that player, then this is the only reason to do it. Otherwise, you just don't execute this trade if you're Indiana, which I think is A-okay as well. Moving on here now to move up trade number 3, and this one is a little bit different. There's not a big deal in here when it comes to what players are on the move. In fact, there's no players being traded in this one, but this is a deal that I think is very, very possible to see on draft night, especially with Indiana's position. They have 2 back end of the first round picks, 26 and 29, and those are valuable to other teams that maybe want to move down and feel like they would be overdrafting a certain player at the spot, feel like, hey, maybe we can get him 7 picks later, and maybe we can pick up extra assets by trading down. This is exactly what's happening in this deal. The Indiana Pacers send 26 and 29 to the Golden State Warriors for pick number 19. This is very reminiscent of a deal between the Oklahoma City Thunder and Minnesota Timberwolves in the 2021 draft, I believe. Maybe it was the 2020 draft. I think it was 2020 draft for Alexei Pokusevski. He was at pick 18. The Timberwolves traded out of 18 to the Oklahoma City Thunder, who then selected him. And in return, the Wolves got picks 25 and 28, which ended up becoming Leandro Bolmaro and Jaden McDaniels. So obviously, based off those names, you say, well, Minnesota won that deal, right? But here, the whole point of it for Indiana is you're targeting a specific guy who you think's not going to fall to that second first-round pick you have at 26, and you move up to get him because you're sold on him. You have 5 assets on draft night, and if you're Indiana, you don't really feel a lot of pain by parting with pick 29 here, because you still have pick 32. Last year we saw how well they could draft in the second round, selecting Andrew Nembhard. I think it's possible Indiana could still add a good player at that spot too. So Golden State, why would they do this trade? Why would they want to be the team that moves down? First of all, it gives you 2 shots in the first round, which for a team like Golden State, who has a massive tax bill, has some real difficulties in probably filling out the depth of this team moving forward with the new CBA, you need to bring in some more young talent and take shots on guys that you think could help you. Last year, we saw the Denver Nuggets with 2 first-round picks. They ended up taking Christian Brown, who had a fantastic rookie year, and they also selected Peyton Watson, although it was very surprising. Still a player that people believe long-term might be able to help them. And I think Golden State's in a position where they need to try and figure something out like that. Now, pick 19 could just be a very big help spot for them too. But maybe Golden State feels like, hey, instead of getting the guy at 19, maybe he'll slide to us at 26. And worst case, we're going to have other players on our board that we do like, that we do think can fit us. And you get 2 selections instead of 1, which again goes a long way in building your depth, adding more young talent to the actual roster, and just giving yourself opportunity to find more players in, I think, a very strong first round this year. And again, for Indiana, you're targeting one specific guy to jump up for. Now, this is kind of a framework deal. It doesn't technically have to be with Golden State, right? The Pacers are the team that have the 2 extra first round picks to trade here. The Pacers, if they could find a way to move up to 18, 17, 16, maybe even 15 with Atlanta, who knows, they would try and execute that as well, right? It's just, there's going to be some steps in that process that they'd have to explore, but I think this is like a framework type of deal. I think Golden State's one of the teams that makes the most sense to move up with, but the other teams maybe in that range as well would be willing to listen. Maybe a team like the Los Angeles Lakers at 17, and like I said, maybe even the Hawks at 15 would at least listen with their new GM Landry Fields. So those were our move-up trades. Let's look at some trade-back options, and I think this is going to be probably the least favorite portion of the video for a lot of Pacers fans, but I do want to just be thorough in this video. Like I said, I don't really expect the Pacers to trade down. It'd be kind of surprising to me, but I do want to be thorough and talk about all of the options here for Indiana so we can kind of lay out the best plan for them. And trade number 1 comes with a team in Oklahoma City who would be very interested in moving up in this year's draft for a shot at a Jarris Walker or a Taylor Hendricks, or one of the other top-end players in this draft, maybe a Cam Whitmore, who maybe doesn't really fit what OKC is doing right now. But if they feel like they could develop him, would fit. Ausar Thompson could also be an intriguing grab for Oklahoma City. And for Indiana here, let's talk about why this deal makes sense. So overall, the Pacers send pick number 7, which I think is a very valuable pick in this year's draft, to Oklahoma City, and the Thunder send back pick number 12, and not 1, but 2 future first-round picks. This is very similar to when they traded up last year in the draft up for Ousmane Dieng. Remember, the Thunder have so many extra assets that they have the ability to maybe even overpay to ensure that they get the pick that they actually want. And this is really strong value here for Indiana. Now, you're maybe looking at the teams that those picks are from. 2024, the Clippers pick next year. Who knows how the hell's going to be with those guys, right? Maybe that pick ends up being pretty decent. And then also the pick for Miami. Obviously, the Heat right now on a run through the conference finals, probably to the finals. You say, well, that's not going to be that great of a pick. It is also 2 years down the road from now, so Kyle Lowry is going to be even older. Duncan Robinson will finally be in the last year of his contract going into that offseason. There's a lot that can change in 2 years. So even though those picks might not be top 10 picks, it's just value for Indiana to move down 5 spots. I feel like the Pacers could still get a very good player at pick number 12. Now, if I was Indiana, I'd have to think long and hard about this, because adding in extra assets is very, very good, especially in trade flexibility and negotiations. And you still also have picks 26 and 29, where maybe they could execute another move up trade with those two and have 2 picks in the teens, or, pick 12 and pick 18, 19, like we talked about with the last one. I think that's a realistic possibility here, while still picking up future assets that you could later deal in trades, or you could just, again, roll into drafts with multiple assets, which I think is a helpful way to help yourself move up down the road. Indiana's in a strong position. I don't think that they should necessarily take this trade. I just kind of wanted to lay it out as a potential option for them. And again, for Oklahoma City, I think if they could get something like this done with the amount of assets that they have, this is a no-brainer. If they have a guy circled on their big board that they say, this is the player that fits next to Chet Holmgren and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams and Josh Giddey and Lou Dort. And to me, Jarace Walker, Taylor Hendricks are those 2 guys that make the most sense there. But there's other pieces that could make some sense too. Sam Presti has kind of an authentic draft board year in, year out, I'd say. And I think he's willing to pull the trigger on something he believes in. And if it moves up to pick 7 to get it done, I think he would really explore doing that. Maybe even a couple extra assets in there in terms of second rounders to really incentivize Indiana to take this offer. Trade back trade number 2, and this one is a deal with the Atlanta Hawks, who, again, like I said earlier, have pick number 15. And this is an interesting move here for Kevin Pritchard if he were to actually look into making something like this a reality. Here, the Pacers end up flipping Daniel Tice into John Collins, which I think is a pretty significant upgrade, and I think a pretty solid fit as well next to Miles Turner. I think John Collins could give you some really nice things at the 4 spot off of Tyrese Halliburton. To me, it's pretty clear that the Hawks want to move John Collins. He's on a pretty big contract, and just quite frankly, the production hasn't been there. I think on a team like Indiana that's a little bit more ball movement-esque than what Atlanta is, with a pretty dominant ball dominant point guard in Trae Young, I think John Collins would fit a little bit better into Indiana. I think his athleticism would be a really nice upgrade for them at the forward spot. And yes, it does cost you pick 7 if you're the Indiana Pacers. And your argument might be, why wouldn't we just stay there and take Taylor Hendricks, Jarace Walker? That's 100% valid. The only risk is it's possible that neither of those guys are there. If, again, at 5 and 6, those 2 players go off the board, then it feels like Pacers at 7 maybe take a guy that they're not sure fits as much, which is why John Collins maybe does make some sense as a potential trade down option. You also get 3 second-round picks and pick 15 in this year's draft. So you move down 8 spots. You get a player who has been productive throughout his career. Again, like I said, the trade back trades are not what I would execute, but I wanted to lay out options here for the Indiana Pacers. To me, moving up makes more sense than moving down for them, just with where they're currently at in their organization. And I also just think that overall, like if I was them, I wouldn't want to just part with pick 7 to get only a John Collins. I would want something better. I 100% understand that, and I 100% agree with that. But I do think that when you look at mock trades, you just can't only consider things that you would do unless you're the actual GM of the team, because who knows, maybe Kevin Pritchard would look into this. Remember, there was rumors for a bunch of years that the Pacers were interested in Ben Simmons. I think that they're interested in some of these high upside additions that could maybe work out really, really well. John Collins, I think, is a player who could make sense in a trade back scenario. It's it's basically getting John Collins into your roster for very little cost. Moving down 8 picks to get John Collins, I think, is pretty decent value, but again, I don't think I would execute this myself. And now the part of the video that I think everyone's been waiting for, which is trading for a veteran. There's 2 trades in this segment as well. And the first one's going to be one that gets a lot of Pacers fans excited. In fact, this is probably the reason you clicked on the video in general. The veteran target number 1. And this one comes with the Toronto Raptors. And I don't think there's a surprise here on what the player is. OG Anunoby. Remember earlier in the year, there was that viral clip of him whispering something to Tyrese Halliburton after a game. And there was speculation, is he saying, come get me, to Indiana when there was all the trade rumors around OG Anunoby? Well, ultimately, the Raptors did not trade him last season. He is still on their roster as we currently speak. But I think a lot of Pacers fans would love to see him back in Indiana. Remember, that's where he did play his college basketball for the Hoosiers. And OG Anunoby, a player that's never been an all-star, but does have a lot of talent, and somebody who I think if people believe he stayed healthy, maybe he would have an all-star bid up to this point of his career. He's a very talented 3-and-D wing, was an all-defense team member this year, and just somebody who really impacts the game on that end of the floor. I think that the Pacers need that on the wing. I think he would be a fantastic addition to this team, but now the price here is quite steep, honestly. And this is where there's going to be some consideration on if Indiana should even execute a deal like this, because you're not giving up just 1 or 2 first-round picks, you're giving up 3 of them. And remember, since this is a draft night trade, after the pick is made at pick 7, they can actually just still trade 2024, and they don't have to abide by the Stepien rule, essentially, which opens up this as a pathway for the Pacers to get this done. So I don't think picks 26 and 29 are enough here to convince Toronto to trade him, because there is other suitors out there. I think the Memphis Grizzlies are going to strongly pursue OG Anunoby. I think that a lot of different teams around the league will have significant interest in Anunoby as a player for them. So if you're Indiana, you have to outbid the market a little bit. And the thing is, Indiana has one of the best assets to trade, which is pick number 7, which is in this deal. Then they would trade a 2024 unprotected first rounder and a 2026 top 10 protected first to the Toronto Raptors, as well as Isaiah Jackson, because the Raptors, if you look at their history, whenever they make a deal, a veteran going out the door, they typically like to bring in some young player who's a little unproven. For example, Kyle Lowry, when he went to the Miami Heat, the player that they really wanted back was Precious Achiuwa. Now, that's kind of gone well, kind of not at certain points. Isaiah Jackson is another guy that they'd like to at least take that risk on and see, hey, maybe we can get something out of him, and maybe he can be a nice addition for us. Pacers fans, I'm interested to hear if you guys think you should execute this trade. Remember, after you make this deal, you would still have picks 26 and 29 to add some talent this year. You also have picks 32 and 55 yet to play with. Does that mean that they try and move up aggressively and get back up into the teens and maybe grab a player that they liked anyway? That's a real possibility, but nonetheless, OG Anunoby, you put him next to the combination of Bennedict Mathurin, Tyrese Halliburton, Buddy Hield, Miles Turner. I think you have something that you do really like, and that you would at least explore if that's going to be enough to help you win or not. But nonetheless, OG Anunoby, his contract fits. They'd have to get an extension done with him, which I do think could be a challenge, and ultimately maybe the reason this deal does not get done. But nonetheless, OG Anunoby, a player that Pacers fans would love to see back in Indiana, and I think he would like to play in Indiana as well, honestly. And then we get into my favorite trade of the entire video, and this is one I really, really like, and it's for a guy who I'm a big fan of, Dorian Finney-Smith. I'm a Dallas Mavericks fan, as you guys know, and Dorian Finney-Smith was one of my favorite players to ever play for the Dallas Mavericks. Fantastic 3-and-D wing, plays within himself. Now, he has some limitations, obviously. There's some things he's not great at. He's not going to be an isolation scorer. He doesn't attack closeouts that elitely as well. You know, there's some issues, but what he does do is he defends the perimeter. He is fantastic in that regard, and I think he would be a fantastic, and I mean fantastic, addition to this Pacers team. And remember who the coach was of the Dallas Mavericks while Dorian Finney-Smith went from being an undrafted free agent to becoming a starter on a team, and not only a starter, a good starter. Rick Carlisle was the coach that oversaw his development and was in that Mavericks organization day in, day out. Dorian Finney-Smith is a very beloved player in the organizations he's played in, especially Dallas. I know Rick Carlisle and him have a very close relationship, and Indiana has the opportunity here to use picks 26 and 29 to go out and target a guy that not only Rick Carlisle likes, but would be a terrific fit next to Tyrese Halliburton and a good perimeter defender for the Indiana Pacers. And yes, it does cost you 2 first-round picks that you send out to the Brooklyn Nets, picks 26 and 29. And Nets fans might be saying, hey, we don't really need more first. We already have picks 21 and 22. This is a bigger move for Brooklyn. The reason that they're making this is to line up 4 first-round picks in this year's draft, plus other assets that they could trade for, say, a Damian Lillard or another top-end player that they would like to make a push for. This is a long-term view for Brooklyn, bringing in more assets now to make another trade on draft night, potentially another trade for a player that they believe would be an awesome player for them. And it's probably the framework for the beginning stages of a 3-team or 4-team trade, which those always get complicated. But Indiana, if you look at the last 2 trades, with the assets you gave up, you could realistically make the deal for OG Anunoby, and you could make the deal for Dorian Finney-Smith. You might have to include some salary filler in there to get the money to balance out. But at the end of the day, the Pacers could walk into next season not only with Halliburton, Hield, Mathurin, Anunoby, Miles Turner. you could also see Dorian Finney-Smith in that lineup as well. You would still have Chris Duarte, likely too, TJ McConnell off the bench. This Pacers team, and then they could maybe go out and get their non-taxpayer mid-level exception to a Jay Crowder. And you're really looking at a well-filled out roster, a team that's added a bunch of wings, which is really what they're missing. They don't have a lot of wing talent right now. Dorian Finney-Smith and OG Anunoby would be two fantastic additions for this team. And I really think 26 and 29 is about the price it would take to get Dorian Finney-Smith. Maybe you have to throw pick 55 in there as well. Maybe a couple extra second rounders. Whatever you do for Indiana, I think that they'd be willing to try and get this done. Again, this is my favorite trade out of all of the bunch because I think Dorian Finney-Smith to Indiana just makes so much sense. They're a team that they have the assets to part with to get him. The Nets, I think, would be willing to do so just based on how their season ended. Obviously, you know, they have a lot of interesting players right now, but I don't think that they're going to sit on their hands and not make any moves. I think the Nets are going to be active this offseason, and I think Dorian Finney-Smith's one of those guys that could get rerouted. And I think Indiana is really the perfect destination for that type of move. Thank you all so much for watching. Just a reminder, we do have our Discord down in the comments section, or in the description, excuse me, below. So make sure to go click that link, join up the Discord. You can chat basketball with a whole bunch of other big-time basketball fans. Would love to see that. Love to see you guys in there. I participate in those Discord chats as well. They're a lot of fun. And then also make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. Let me know down in the comment section what you thought about these Indiana Pacers trades, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.